Okay. Good evening, everyone in Georgia, and hello, Vicky, who is in Europe right now, in Central European time. Thank you for being here. It's a real honor, and our main topic will be, as the title shows, what should we know about the Russia and conservatism, which is quite questionable issue for us, and we want to spend some time for it, So, hello, represent yourself, and let's continue then.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm Victoria. I'm Polish, but I also grew up in the UK. And in recent years, I've kind of been going back and forth between the two countries. My background is in law. I also run a few companies with my family, and I'm also the vice president and treasurer of ECPU, which is the only explicitly Christian political youth organization in the European Parliament. So that's what I do, and also how I know Giorgi.
That's great. Okay, so it would not be strange if we start talking about religion in Poland then, right? Based on your portfolio. So I have a good experience of traveling in Poland and staying there for some time in different periods. And what I saw was very different from many, especially Western European nations. And in terms of understanding Christianity and also conservatism, like values, Georgians and Poles are not very far from each other. And that's why Poles always say hi to Georgians. They love to know we are Georgians and so on and so forth. So my point of interest was what was the living standard in Poland during Soviet time, because Poland was like allied republic, and how was the attitude towards Polish lifestyle and religion there? I think that will be very interesting for listeners.
Yes, so I think Poland was in a very unique situation because unlike the USSR, as well as some other satellite states like Romania, Bulgaria, our religion wasn't suppressed to the extent that it was in other states. So of course, priests and clergy were, surveyed, and there was top-down control and infiltration. But it wasn't as extreme as it was, for example, in the USSR. So we were still allowed to celebrate, Christmas, Easter, religious holidays, and even as far as our church leadership went. So with the Catholic Church, they were still, even though the regime did try to infiltrate the church, they weren't very successful. And I think the best example of that is Saint John Paul II, who became Pope during the height of communism. And obviously he was one of the key figures in resisting communism and its eventual fall in our region. So even though we did try to infiltrate, the opposite thing happened. So instead of achieving this indoctrination and infiltration of the church became the biggest resistance movement that mobilized the whole society, and many priests took on kind of political activist roles. Even the priest that, for example, baptized me 10 years before I was baptized, Margaret Thatcher, was in that church with the priest who married my parents and baptized me. And many priests were very active in resisting communism. And I think the reason for that is because Poles have always been very predominantly and strongly Catholic. And since the Catholic Church has its center in Rome, it didn't have the same infiltration as the Orthodox Church, perhaps, which I feel that in countries where Orthodoxy is predominant, there's a different relationship between church and state to begin with. And also it might have been easier for Moscow to infiltrate, whereas with the Catholic Church, due to the structure, it's a bit more difficult. And also the Poles have always been very strongly Catholic, because before communism, we disappeared off the map for 123 years. So during that time, we really clung onto our faith, and our faith was the transmitter of our national identity and our culture. So even if the state did try to suppress that, they knew that if they pushed too hard, there would be a mass rebellion. And even with the communist politicians that we had, even if they were professing atheists, their wives, their mothers, people within their family were strongly Catholic. So because of that, they just weren't very successful in comparison to Romania, Bulgaria, or the USSR.
Yeah, but there was quite different in Caucasus, in Georgia as well, because their purpose to make anti-Christian the society. Actually, during several decades that worked, but for the early 1980s, Georgian society also went towards church, and it was also one of the pillars of anti-communist movement here. So yeah, these are quite similarities on some level.
Yeah.
Before we go to this Russia issue, I really want you to tell us about Poland as a country which found kind of a perfect balance in terms of being conservative and also being like pro-American in values, and this kind of that was what they found, and that's how Poland lives, in my
Yes.
view.
So I think Poland has always been the bridge between the West and the East. Well, our geography is straight in the center of Europe, but our cultural background has been more towards the West, because of being part of the Western Christian right, Roman law, our legal norms, and certain political institutions. But at the same time, also under the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, we also had some influences from the East, with the Ruthenians, so the today Ukrainians and Belarusians, and some Orthodox minorities, or some Tatar Muslim minorities, which we still have to this day. So it always had those influences from both the West and the East. However, we still predominantly we still feel more Western, in the sense that we are part of the Latin civilization. So we have the Latin alphabet, the Latin Christian rite. We went through the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. So our nobility converted to Protestantism at one point, and we still have like a large Lutheran community in the south of Poland, in former Galicia, and we were actually like the Protestant hub of the Habsburg Empire. So we had experienced the Reformation, and then we also experienced the Counter-Reformation, with the Jesuits leading that. So even though we're still predominantly Catholic, we went through kind of all of those cultural changes that Western Europe went through, from the Enlightenment ideals and humanism to Reformation and Counter-Reformation and the Renaissance. So we have always been part of that cultural heritage. That's why when communism happened, it was such a shock to our system, because it wasn't only an economic and political regime change, but to us, we were torn away from our Western heritage, because we never had, we always saw Russia as culturally alien to us. And when communism happened, we were kind of erased of the map of the West and kind of put into one box with this culture that we never identified with. And Poland's history goes way back before Russia's, and we have 1,000 years of history. And we during the 16th and 17th centuries, we had the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which encompassed the Jews, Orthodox, Tatar Muslims, Catholics, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Poles, and Lithuanians. And it was very ahead of its time, especially compared to the rest of Western Europe too, because we had a kind of a proto-democratic system where the king wasn't hereditary, but the nobility in parliament had to elect the king. And we also had something called liberum veto, which meant that every MP had a right to veto any decision. And so there wasn't a majority, but it was unanimous that everyone had to agree. So we had very democratic institutions already back then. And we also had the first modern written constitution in Europe and the second in the world after the USA. We've always had this perfect balance between being very liberal, but also conservative when it comes to faith, tradition. And even the British 18th century philosopher Edmund Burke, he drew a comparison between the Poles and the French revolutionaries. And he said, when the Poles made reform with their constitution, they did it to reduce anarchy and bring back order. Whereas when the French revolutionaries did it, they did it to sever ties with the past and their traditions in the church and institutions. So we were very much always too liberal for our own good, because while those liberal institutions were good, they also made it easy for foreign powers to control us from outside, including the Russian Empire. So they would kind of try to influence the parliamentarians on who to elect as king. And because of that, when we finally came out with our constitution, we removed the unanimity, the liberum veto, and we instituted majority vote. And we also brought back hereditary kings instead of elected kings. However, by that time, it was already too late, because some parliamentarians didn't want to lose their civil liberties. The nobility didn't want to lose their civil liberties. So they went to Russia and said, put a stop to this. And eventually the Russian Empire, the Prussian Empire, so the German Empire, and the Habsburg Empire partitioned us, and we disappeared off the map for 123 years. So those reforms came a bit too late, because they weren't able to safeguard our statehood. But in 1918, after the fall of the Habsburg Empire and after the end of World War I, we were able to regain our statehood.
Yeah. All of this I wanted to hear to understand what is a real conservatism and the ground for it, on the example of Poland. But today we want to also discuss why Russians are pretending themselves as conservatives today, and overall why modern Russian political elites clarified and positioned themselves as conservatives. Before I give a word to you, I want to make some introduction on this. Maybe why it happens, we are thinking a lot about that. Maybe it's like well organized and well researched issue from the Russian side, which is, and they actually have a very good special services. Unfortunately, they work hard and have some results sometimes. So maybe they came to the conclusion that the Western liberal elites are moving towards like left liberalism, let's say. So liberalism is sometimes confusing term, so we do not want to, insult anyone. So these leftist liberals, which these elites actually, in my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, the general public and the people of the Western countries and nations, such as United States or France or Germany, or UK, they were kind of alienated from the causes of the left liberal elites. So maybe the Russian politicians, and now especially President Putin, he wanted to divide the Western countries and somehow offer for the Western population and the people his views as an alternative of the Western governments, to make some division and the infiltration into the society. Because under my observation, for example, maybe there are some radicals, but in American conservative circles, I've even met to some people who think Vladimir Putin is closer to their ideas rather than, for example, this democratic elites, Democratic Party elites. So it's kind of too extreme. But if we watch the results and the policies and the issues, maybe that was the purpose from the beginning, and that's what we see right now in reality. What's your opinion on it?
I agree. It's even documented that Russia uses these cultural wars that we're having in the West in order to divide or destabilize our societies. And when I was doing my master thesis research, I found different reports of these Russian groups that were indicted, and they were basically posing as Americans, even though they were doing this all from servers in Russia and Belarus, and they were mobilizing other fellow Americans to go out in the streets and protest on the grounds of race, discrimination, or other leftist causes. So this was before even BLM was a thing, and they came up with an organization called Blacktivist, which on the outside appears to be American, but when they dug into it, it turned out it was all set up by Russians. So they've been doing this for years, decades, trying to destabilize our Western societies. And even in 2014, the Secretary General of NATO admitted that Russia was funding green NGOs in Europe to discourage us from being energy independent, and in turn just stop digging our own oil and depend fully on Russian gas and oil. So they I don't think it's even just leftist NGOs that they fund. They also do the same with very fringe rights organizations too.
Yeah.
We just try to destabilize our societies on whatever grounds that they can. And I also don't think that it's strictly about them posing as being conservative, because the ideology changes, but the aims stay the same. So whether it was Tsarist Russia or communist Russia or contemporary Russia, all they wish to maintain is power, and they will do this or justify this by any means possible. So whether it's with communist ideology or conservative ideology, the means change, but the aims remain the same. And
Yeah.
I always think it's funny when people fall for this myth of Russian conservatism, because when you actually look at the statistics, or when you actually understand the Russian society, you see they have some of the highest divorce rates in the world. I think we're the third highest in the world. 74% of Russians get divorced. Abortion rates are also one of the highest, and Bolshevik Russia was the first to actually legalize abortion, and it's still very liberal. They haven't changed it under Putin. And even with Russian Orthodoxy, because for 70 years religion was so suppressed under the Bolsheviks and then the Soviets, a lot of Russians, yes, they identify as Russian Orthodox, but it's more of a cultural or national identity to them, because they don't actually attend services, not services, they don't attend liturgy every week. They also don't really practice the moral law of Christianity or Orthodoxy. So it's more of an identity instead of an actual conviction or faith that they hold. And statistically, more Russians are into occultistic practices, into witchcraft, tarot, sects, things like that, than they are into actually practicing Christianity in the way that Christianity is practiced in Georgia or Poland, Armenia, etc. So I think people just don't understand Russian society very well, and they just believe whatever Putin says.
Yeah, that's. I mean, in my view, all of these statistics you have here, these are quite crucial for the Western societies to know, because I don't know why sometimes they really confuse Russian society to the conservative society, and in terms of family values and abortions and divorce rates, they also have a quite severe level of alcoholism and drug usage, which is even reflected into the Russian population in Georgia, who came here after war in Ukraine. Also, in connection with it, they kind of have their own town in Batumi city. It's in the seaside of Black Sea, and they have a quite huge community already, and they organize some like terrible parties and I mean, I didn't even want to name. So I really can understand how can we name these people as like
Conservative.
family values and conservative guys. I mean, it's total nonsense. So it's a huge problem, but I think for some parts of the society, these statistics, as you showed to us, many people also try to spread around these digits and numbers. What kind of society actually Russia is? But I mean, still, sometimes those Americans and even Europeans, they feel more connection with even the people who just describe themselves as Christians if they do not attend the church every week. It's also a reflection of the problems of Western society. Maybe if the Western societies were like in a better condition, like with a simple words to say, I do not think that it would have been so easy for Russians like special services to infiltrate our societies then. Yeah, and the last question I have to you today would be, for example, Russians are using their weapons, like their tools, to somehow spread anti-American attitudes in Georgia, and not only in Georgia, I'm sure. But it's understandable, as we have been in a Soviet time, the part of the Soviet Union, and in the first decade in post-Soviet society of Georgia, there was almost like the Russia in terms of control. The defense ministry and most of the forces were actually the continuation of Russian services in this first decade. I mean, so it's not surprise, but for now we have a little bit different situation, but still we have the same form of propaganda, same form of anti-American and also anti-European, anti-EU propaganda, especially for now. So what would you say? How could Poland handle this kind of propaganda machine from the Russian side, and what would be your advice for the Georgian society?
Yes, so I think Poland is a bit unique. We definitely have the anti-EU propaganda, the anti-European propaganda, but anti-Americanism is not as powerful. I think, if anything, we have sometimes too much pro-Americanism. Even when I met the former head of the Polish intelligence, I remember she was telling us, Poles don't understand that just because someone is your ally doesn't mean that our national interests and their national interests won't always align. So Poles are naturally distrusting of Russians. Like if someone called Sergei or someone Russian speaking comes and calls up, they're already suspicious and alarm bells start ringing. But on the other hand, if Americans come to the embassy, we're like, oh, take anything you want, like, please just come. So by nature, we've always been very pro-American because our histories have been closely tied. We had certain Poles like Puławski and Kościuszko fight in the American Revolution, and also during the Cold War, President Jimmy Carter had a Polish advisor on national security, and obviously we have a huge Polish diaspora in the United States, and Ronald Reagan also helped us a lot. So we always felt like a strong sympathy towards the United States that we don't necessarily feel to the same extent towards France or the UK. Even though there were times, obviously, when the States let us down, we always kind of say, oh, but they were just manipulated by Stalin. But when it comes to the French and the Brits, we're like, oh no, they knew what they were doing. So we have this kind of romantic view of America, and because of this, sometimes we don't focus on building strong regional allies with our European neighbors who actually do have the same interests as us. So instead of focusing on building stronger allies with Germany or Finland or the EU, we just wait for Americans to come and save us if something happens. And I think after my experiences with meeting certain Republicans who made it clear that Central Eastern Europe is not their first priority and that they don't necessarily see Russia as an enemy, I think that's a really bad strategy to put all our hope into Americans who may not have the same interest as us if something happens with Russia. So I think we need to resist this urge to fall into anti-EU propaganda and build strong regional allies with our neighbors, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether they're liberal or leftist. All that matters is that we have the same interests at hand. We both have the same threats arising out of Russia. And Poles need to stop thinking in ideological terms about geopolitics, because it doesn't matter that the administration in the States is conservative and anti-woke. What matters is that they have the same interests as us. And so Polish conservatives kind of look through ideological lens always, instead of actually thinking, okay, who do we have converging interests with? who will realistically help us if something happens. So I think we need to be a bit more strategic when it comes to geopolitics and not act as vassals of any state, but actually build our own autonomy and build our own position so that we can resist any external threats from Russia. So my advice to Georgia would be to, of course, have allies, but don't rely just on, especially allies that are far away, don't just rely that they will exchange your loyalty with help, but actually build your own strong autonomy and security and build strong allies in your region and with your neighboring countries, because that's the safest way to protect yourself. Whereas Poles always think about honor and shared values and all of these things, but shared values don't matter so much in geopolitics. It's more about interests at the end of the day, and no one wants their own people to die or shed blood for another country, especially another country that's far away. So at the end of the day, it's about interests when it comes to international relations.
All right, these are quite good lesson from you, in my view, because we have been searching for this kind of alliance with the United States, and I mean, we are still doing that, and I'm also involved in this process, honestly. But you are right. The most reliable partner is your own army in the end.
Yes.
So this is what Poland does, what I observe, and that's a great job. Great job you do. So good luck with that. And I hope we will have an opportunity to speak a little bit more in the next time.
Yes.
Let's say thanks to the viewers, and hope to see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you
Victoria.
for inviting me.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.
დარიო რადიო მუდამ კარგი დარია.